We've talked about what it means to live alone and how it's an increasingly common phenomenon. We talked about that increased risk in mortality for those living alone, as shown in a large meta analysis. Let's now turn to what is the cause of why do people live alone and what the health impacts of living alone may be. So why we live alone. I live in San Francisco. I see patients in San Francisco. Many of them are in their 20s. They just moved to San Francisco. They're single but seeking marriage or long-term relationships. They're in a transitional period and they don't see themselves, hopefully, living alone for the rest of their lives. So one category are people who are, because of life stage, living alone, but not permanently preferring to live alone. What is not addressed in the literature, but what I personally found relevant was whether or not someone's an introvert or extrovert. I put a question mark here because it's not addressed by the literature, but it would seem to me that people who preferred to live alone because they were introverts versus preferred to live alone because of negative social cognitions, which we'll get to in a moment, might not have the same harm from living alone. They might actually prefer to live alone for positive reasons rather than for avoidance of social contacts. But that's not addressed in the literature, and so it's not something to hang my hat on. So I'm going to move on. The most important category we can address when we talk about why people live alone is the group of people who prefer to avoid that intimacy of cohabitation. And that's the group where there's probably the strongest link for risk in health outcomes. So if you're in the category of someone who is living alone because you just moved somewhere or because you're younger and haven't found a mate, then it won't make sense to talk about negative social cognitions. It's more people who over their lifetime don't intend to live with someone, don't desire to live with someone, that we should address our attention to. So we're going to use the same rationale and understanding that we applied to loneliness and social isolation when we talk about why people live alone. In understanding why people become socially isolated, we can start with an initial event where someone is socially isolated. They feel left out. That feeling of left out causes a profound motivation to reconnect. It's the equivalent of physical pain. When you're lonely, it's an emotional pain that can be as aversive as physical pain. So we're intensely disturbed by feeling left out from an evolutionary perspective. Doesn't contribute to the survival of to the passage of our genes if we are isolated from the clan. So we do all we can to reconnect, but we also become very aware of the possibility of future slights to our self, the future instances of being left out. And it's that social hypervigilance that causes the problem. It can lead us to start having cognitive biases in our interactions with others. We can start to see the world as just a place where we're going to get another rejection. We can expect in our interactions with others we're going to be rejected once again. We can take information that would otherwise be neutral, like somebody not looking up when we walk by, or somebody refusing to spend time with us when we invite them on a date. Those could all be benign, innocent, have nothing to do with us. The person could be otherwise busy. The person could be preoccupied with their own concerns. But when we are already primed to expect social isolation and rejection, we can interpret negatively these totally neutral experiences and have them confirm for us what we were worried about. We can also start being more guarded in our interactions with people and more aloof. And this can have a self-fulfilling prophecy effect where if we start acting with people like we don't want to connect with them when we're really just afraid of rejection, it can cause them to not want to connect with us. And they can actually start behaving in ways that lead us to be rejected and be isolated but it's more because of our cutting ourselves off from them rather than anything inherently about us that they don't like. So what I've described here really is a way of kind of categorizing yourself and your situation if you are living alone. If it's a circumstantial thing, you just move somewhere, or it's a transition, then that's one category. If it's actually because of a desire to be separate from others, and then that's something else that we can consider as potentially due to a biased cognition. Now, once again, the idea that maybe these people who live alone don't have biased cognitions, they're just introverts, they just thrive alone, hasn't really been suggested in the literature. So it's me going out on a limb, and we can't really say more about it.